My own sister threw my food into the mud and humiliated me on the streets of Monterrey, calling me a starving beggar. She had no idea who owned the luxury car that pulled up for me. If you love real-life stories with unbelievable twists and poetic justice, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you never miss our next videos. I have always believed that a person's true character is revealed by how they treat those they consider beneath them. In Monterrey, the great Mexican city where I built my entire life with sweat and dedication, the sun is usually relentless on the asphalt, but nothing was colder than the look of contempt from my own sister, Camila. Since we were children, she always sought to stand out at my expense, harboring a disproportionate pride that, over the years, turned into pure arrogance. Our parents always spoiled her, giving her everything she asked for, while I had to work twice as hard for every small achievement. Over time, this difference created a deep chasm between us, and Camila began to see me not as a sister, but as an embarrassment, an obstacle in her path of social climbing and endless vanity. On that sweltering Tuesday afternoon, I was wearing an old faded pair of jeans, worn-out sneakers from my daily routine, and a simple gray cotton t-shirt with no logo or visible brand. My hair was tied up in a messy, hurried bun, and my face carried no makeup at all. I was standing outside one of the most exquisite restaurants in downtown Monterrey, holding a small metal lunchbox containing an extremely special recipe, a truffled mushroom risotto that I had prepared in my own kitchen the night before, testing ingredients and proportions until achieving absolute perfection. To anyone passing by that busy sidewalk under the blazing Mexican heat, I looked like just another humble worker trying to make a living, completely invisible to the high society that frequented the establishment. Suddenly, the powerful roar of an imported sports car's engine cut through the heavy traffic noise and caught everyone's attention on the sidewalk. It was a shiny red sedan, its paint gleaming under the bright sunlight. The vehicle parked abruptly against the curb, right in front of the entrance of the prestigious restaurant. The passenger door swung open, and out stepped Camila, sporting an expensive designer dress, oversized sunglasses, and a limited edition leather handbag. Beside her, holding her hand, was Alejandro, her arrogant fiancé, a man in a custom-made dark gray suit who walked with slow, pretentious steps, maintaining a superior posture as if the entire world owed him some kind of special favor. A man who believed money could buy respect. I remained exactly where I was, watching the scene in silence. Camila walked decisively toward the restaurant entrance, but stopped abruptly when her eyes met mine. I saw the expression of surprise on her face quickly morph into a smile of pure contempt and derision. She slowly took off her sunglasses, revealing a gaze of utter superiority, and approached me with slow, firm steps, her high heels clicking loudly against the rough concrete of the sidewalk, drawn to the opportunity of humiliating me publicly in front of the elegant crowd. She stopped less than a yard from where I stood, crossed her arms dismissively, and let out a loud, shrill laugh, causing several people around us to stop and watch. In a voice dripping with venom, she pointed her index finger at my face and yelled for everyone to hear. "Look what we have here. What a pathetic sight. Valeria, my own sister, reduced to this? A starving beggar selling street food to get a few coins on the sidewalk? Don't you have any shame? Look at how you dress. You look like a complete failure." I took a deep breath, maintaining that unshakable calm that has always been my greatest strength against her provocations. I looked Camila directly in the eyes and calmly replied that this metal lunchbox contained something extremely valuable, the result of a lot of hard work, and that she should not judge a person's dignity by their appearance. However, my quiet words seemed to only ignite an irrational fury inside her. Camila took an aggressive step forward, violently snatched the metal lunchbox from my hands, and threw it with all her might onto the hard pavement of the sidewalk, wanting to break my spirit. The metal container hit the firm ground with a sharp clang that echoed across the street. The lid popped off from the impact, and the truffled risotto, which I had spent hours preparing with the utmost care, spilled into the dark mud and dirt that had accumulated near the curb. As if that humiliation were not enough for her inflated ego, Camila raised her foot and stepped directly on top of the food with her high heel, crushing the rice and mushrooms into the street's filth, grinding it as if she were grinding my dignity. She looked back into my eyes, her face completely distorted by the sadistic pleasure of seeing me in that situation, and hissed, "This is exactly where your garbage food belongs, Valeria. In the mud of the gutter. You are an absolute disgrace to our family name. A miserable, starving beggar who has nowhere to turn and will never achieve anything in life." Alejandro, who was watching everything with crossed arms by her side, let out a mocking, ironic laugh, adjusting the knot of his silk tie and commenting that it was truly a shame to see someone fall so low in life, but that some people were just born to live in the gutter. The scene Camila caused eventually attracted the attention of the establishment's manager, who hurried outside to see what the commotion was about. Camila pointed at me with disgust and demanded that he remove me from the premises immediately, claiming that such a low-class presence would scare away real wealthy customers. The manager glanced at me and, for a brief second, hesitated. But before he could utter a single word that might jeopardize his job, I gave him a subtle look, silently commanding him to remain silent and reveal absolutely nothing of what he knew of my true identity. I looked down at the ruined food scattered in the dirt, and then turned my gaze back to my sister's triumphant face. I did not shed a single tear of sadness, I did not scream, and I did not show any sign of despair. Instead, I just smiled very discreetly. I knew something crucial that Camila could not even conceive in her delusions of grandeur. The truth behind that scene was infinitely more complex and surprising than she could ever imagine, and the tables were about to turn in a way she would never forget. I was not a beggar, let alone a desperate street vendor. My name is Valeria Garza, and I am the founder, chief executive officer, and majority shareholder of the renowned Imperial Gastronomy Group, one of the largest restaurant and luxury hospitality holdings in Mexico. That elegant restaurant we were standing in front of was just one of more than 50 branches that my company controlled. And the only reason I was there, wearing old jeans and worn-out sneakers, was a surprise quality inspection that I had planned meticulously to see the real state of my business. I often conducted these disguised visits to personally evaluate, without any filters, the actual quality of service provided by the employees and the genuine experience offered to ordinary customers, far from the excessive flattery that managers reserved when they knew the owner was present. The risotto in the lunchbox was a new recipe that I had developed myself to integrate into the chain's new executive menu, and I was about to test it with the head chef of that branch. But Camila had just destroyed the signature dish of the owner of the entire corporation, showing her true colors. While she was still savoring what she believed to be the greatest victory of her life over me, a black armored luxury sedan with completely tinted windows approached slowly and parked smoothly against the curb, right next to where we were standing. Camila and Alejandro immediately stopped laughing to stare at the luxurious vehicle with wide, greedy eyes. Alejandro commented, his voice filled with envy, that the car cost more than the house they lived in, and wondered what powerful businessman was visiting the restaurant at that exact moment, completely unaware of who was about to step in. Then, the rear door of the vehicle opened. A tall man, dressed in an impeccable black suit, driver's cap, and white cotton gloves, stepped out with natural elegance. It was Marcos, my private chauffeur who had worked for me for over 10 years. He completely ignored Camila and Alejandro's loud presence, walked directly toward me, bowed respectfully, and said in a clear voice, "Good afternoon, Mrs. Garza. Your vehicle is ready, and all the directors of the holding are already waiting for you in the executive boardroom for the final signing of the merger contract." The silence that fell over the sidewalk was absolute, suffocating. Camila's jaw dropped in shock. She stared at Marcos, then at the luxury car, and finally at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and confusion. Her hands began to shake uncontrollably. She took a step back, stammering senseless words, pointing her finger at me, and trying to ask the chauffeur in white gloves if he was making a terrible mistake by calling that beggar Mrs. Garza, unable to process the reality of my success. Marcos replied in a firm, cold tone that it would be absolutely impossible to mistake the identity of the founder and owner of the entire Imperial Gastronomy Group. Alejandro, hearing that name, went so pale it looked as though all the blood had been drained from his body. He knew exactly what that name represented in the financial market. Alejandro was an executive who had been desperately trying, for over 6 months, to schedule a single meeting with our holding to try to save his family's construction company from imminent bankruptcy through a service contract. I looked directly at Camila and Alejandro, who now looked like 2 petrified salt statues under the hot sun. With all the calm in the world, I took a step forward, wiped a trace of dust that had fallen on my simple sneaker with a tissue, and remarked that appearances often deceive small minds. Without saying another word, I got into the luxury car. Marcos closed the door with a soft click, leaving the 2 of them behind in the sweltering heat of the street, paralyzed next to the crushed remains of the risotto that Camila had stepped on with such pride. However, the true poetic justice of that day was just beginning. The official meeting for the signing of the contracts was scheduled to take place right in the VIP room of the executive floor of that very restaurant. After entering through the private service entrance, I took a quick shower in the executive dressing room and changed out of my simple clothes. A few minutes later, I re-emerged wearing a custom-tailored navy blue suit, Italian designer high heels, and discreet real diamond jewelry. My hair was now perfectly styled, and my face wore an unquestionable expression of leadership. When I entered the executive boardroom, where the main members of the board of directors were already seated around the mahogany table, my director of operations stood up to greet me. He informed me that the representatives of the small construction company that had been begging for our partnership had already arrived and were waiting in the anteroom with visible nervousness. He explained that the name of the young engineer in charge was Alejandro, and that he was accompanied by his fiancée, who had insisted on being present to witness the closing of the deal. I gave a slight, ironic smile and ordered them to be brought into the room immediately. The large door opened, and Camila and Alejandro walked into the room with wide, practiced smiles, holding leather folders under their arms. But the exact moment Alejandro looked up and saw me sitting imposing in the main presidential chair, the leather folder he was holding slipped from his trembling fingers and fell heavily to the floor, scattering papers all over the luxury carpet. Camila took a step back, covering her mouth with both hands in absolute panic as she realized that the beggar sister she had humiliated minutes ago was the owner of the entire corporation. Alejandro began to break out in a cold sweat, trying to stammer mindless apologies, repeating that it was all a street misunderstanding and that he would have never allowed Camila to act that way if he had known who I really was. Camila, trembling from head to toe, tried to take a step toward me, forcing a fake, pathetic smile, calling me dear little sister, and claiming that everything that happened was just a family joke to test my humility, begging for my forgiveness. I raised my right hand gently, a simple gesture of authority that was enough to make both of them fall silent instantly. I turned my gaze to the financial director beside me and, in a firm, calm voice, ordered all the documents of Alejandro's proposal to be collected and shredded immediately. I commented in front of everyone that the Imperial Gastronomy Group would never associate its prestigious brand with cowardly executives who tolerated the humiliation of humble workers, or with empty people who believed that a human being's value is based on the price of their designer clothes. Alejandro began to beg desperately, arguing that the rejection of that contract meant the immediate bankruptcy of his family's construction company and the loss of all their assets, throwing them into the ruin they wished upon me. Camila began to cry bitterly, but these were not tears of sincere regret, but rather of pure desperation at seeing the future of absolute luxury she had planned crumble before her eyes. I stood up, looked into the eyes of each of them with unshakable serenity, and declared that the meeting was officially over and that they should be escorted out of the building by security immediately. They were escorted out of the restaurant under the disapproving gaze of everyone present. I walked slowly to the huge glass window of my office and watched them walk with bowed heads toward their red sedan, their shoulders slumped under the weight of defeat, knowing that their extreme arrogance had cost them everything they owned. The story of the proud sister who lost her future in the mud, and the worker who proved that true nobility is not bought with money, but demonstrated through respect and human dignity, began to be told in every corner of Monterrey. This story shows that those who humiliate others to feel superior always end up falling from their own pedestal. What did you think of Valeria's decision in the boardroom and outside the restaurant? Share your thoughts in the comments, like this video, and subscribe to support our work in bringing stories with great life lessons to you.